Hello, bonsoir, and welcome to the Get French Football News Show. I'm Nathan Staples, and joining me this evening is Rich Allen. The first half of the Ligue 1 season is drawing to a close, and some defences have already got into the Christmas spirit. But before we start wrapping our own presents here at Get French Football News, here are the latest headlines. Saint-Etienne continued their recent run of poor form as they underwent a 4-0 thrashing at the hands of Monaco on Friday evening. The home side saw goalkeeper Stéphane Ruffier sent off in bizarre fashion after the standing captain confronted the linesman for the champions' second goal. On Saturday, the early kickoff saw Paris Saint-Germain herald the return of Neymar with a 4-1 win away to Rennes. The Brazilian notched a double in a game which saw Benjamin Andre and Presnel Kimpembe both receive their marching orders. In the multiplex, Dijon poured more pressure on cash-strapped Lille with a 3-0 victory, while Metz won for just the second time this season with a 3-1 result against Montpellier. Elsewhere, Strasbourg made it 3 wins in a row by beating Toulouse 2-1. Troyes halted their own 3-game slide by defeating Amiens 1-0, as Caen and Guingamp each earned a point in a goalless draw. On Sunday, Nantes won by a single goal for the 9th time this season, sinking lowly Angers 1-0 despite Yassine Bamou's seeing red, while Nice have Mario Balotelli to thank as they saw off Bordeaux by the same scoreline. In Sunday's big match, Lyon came out on top against a very game Marseille side. Nabil Fekir opened proceedings with a big helping hand from Steve Mandanda before Mariano Diaz made it 2 after half-time. However, the real man of the match was Anthony Lopez, who kept a clean sheet despite facing 19 shots from the away side. In off-the-pitch matches, Lille have officially parted ways with manager Marcelo Bielsa. Contract termination has been agreed, but there are no further details on any compensation agreement between the two parties. And that's all for the news. But remember, to stay up to date with all your latest in French football, head on over to our website at www.getfootballnewsfrance.com and follow us on Twitter at GFFN. We start this week with the final game of the weekend and what ended up being a tale of two goalkeepers. Let's start with the home stopper in Anthony Lopez, Rich, who pulled out what many say is a man of the match performance. Is he the best goalkeeper in Ligue 1 at this moment in time?
Certainly off the basis of that performance, he is without a doubt. I think he's always been a really, really good shot stopper. Excellent reflexes, very agile goalkeeper. There are one or two questions when it comes to dealing with the ball into the box, but when it comes to out-and-out shot stopping ability, I think he's second to none. It was a terrific performance from him. I mean, it had to be. You know, Lyon it just didn't seem to be particularly their day. I mean, they got a very, very fortunate goal to open things up early on in the game. But for the vast majority of those 90 minutes, they were outplayed by Marseille. And it really was down to Lopez and to a much lesser extent some slightly wayward shooting from the Marseille side. But I think Marseille can feel themselves quite unlucky to have come away with the defeat.
Yeah, given the balance of the game, really, I thought Marseille played pretty well in a counter that we mentioned a few times on recent podcasts that felt like the game that they really needed to prove themselves in. It was the game that was, this is, if they want Champions League football, this is the kind of game they needed to win. And yes, they come up short, which is disappointing, but ever since that draw against Paris Saint-Germain where they should have won, and that run they've been on recently where they were unbeaten in 10 or so games, it felt like things were slowly starting to get into the right position. They maybe need a couple more players and a little bit of luck to go their way once or twice. Maybe that second half of the season will be interesting depending on what they do in January. But it just felt like they just didn't quite have enough. They weren't quite as clinical as Lyon, although we'll mention it in a moment. The first goal was an absolute gift, but the second one is a little bit too simple as well for Mariano Diaz to stick it at the in at the back post. It just felt like they haven't quite got the edge that some of these other bigger teams obviously got thumped by Monaco early in the season, but this game felt like Lyon at least had that extra edge to them that Marseille don't quite have yet. But I did want to talk about the goalkeeper again in this one, and it is Steve Mandanda, and he's had a relatively decent season coming back. He's had a couple of good performances, but the mistake for the Fekir goal it's almost inexcusable, isn't it?
It's inexcusable in isolation, definitely. I mean, it's an absolutely appalling mistake. I can only presume it was one of those, taking the eye off the ball. It was a fairly tame free kick from Fekir. Been an easy gather for Mandanda. He's a very able goalkeeper. That's the bread and butter stuff for him. But he seems to have just taken his eye off the ball and ends up sort of helping it into his own net. I've cut him some slack because I think over the course of obviously this season with his return and then all the previous seasons when he was at Marseille before his move to Crystal Palace, he's still in credit, I think, with Marseille. I think he's saved them far many more times than he's committed that kind of error. We have seen that kind of error before, but I tweeted during the game, he's playing behind some pretty ropey defending at large parts of this season. So it's a horrible mistake to make, but it offers. He's not a goalkeeper that's incredibly prone to these kind of mistakes. He is a goalkeeper, and it's just one of those unfortunate things. The thing I think I wanted to see from this Marseille performance, for me, it really highlighted where Rudy Garcia has to improve this squad in January. And for me, it's 4 areas of the pitch, which sounds quite a lot, I know, but they need a more dynamic right back. Sakai is, he's okay, and he's certainly not the worst of the defenders they've got at the club, but he's not what you would call dynamic. So I think they need to look at that. Rumours of Leo Dubois possibly coming in from Nantes. They need some centre-backs. That second goal against Lyon just sort of really, really showed up just what a disorganised centre-back pairing, be it Rolando and Rami, be it Rolando and Abdenor, Rami Abdenor, particularly stellar centre-backs. Time and time again with Marseille, they have to look at addressing that. So that's position number 2. Position number 3, they've got to work out what's happening with Dimitri Payet. An absolute shadow of the player he was. Whether it's the captaincy's not working for him, whether he's simply just not good enough anymore, whether there's something going on that we don't know about, that has to be addressed, because I've lost track of the amount of times this season he's produced pretty anonymous performances. And then the 4th one is they need a reliable goal scorer. They eventually plumped with Germain and Mitroglou, neither of which have been prolific, neither of which look certainties if they were presented with a fairly simple opportunity. So it sounds like I've dissected that team quite brutally, but they're fairly simple areas, I think. The Payet issue may be a little bit more tricky, but it sounds like they're looking at right back. There's plenty of needs for their centre backs that they can get, be it whether they want to spend a little or a bit more. And there's options. There are options that they can look at up front. So if in the January transfer window, Garcia and McCourt and Zubizarreta can all work together and address these issues, there's absolutely no reason why this Marseille side can't finish top 3. Aside from defensive lapse, aside from inspired goalkeeping from Lopez and some wayward shooting from Germain and the like, it was a good performance from Marseille. So the bare bones are there. You know, that midfield looks pretty good. They've got options, you know, out wide with Thauvin. You know, Campos seems to have found a little bit of, you know, he's still very, very hit and miss, but, you know, balancing him with Ng, and they seem to be getting a little bit of consistency, at least between the two of them. So there's the groundings are there. It's a big January transfer window now, I think, for Marseille.
Yeah, and it's how far they want to push it, isn't it? I mean, I think the link to Leo Dubois, I think that's a good sign. And I think at Marseille's budget, if they are looking at those kind of players, there's quite a few right backs that they maybe could have a gander at. I'm thinking of Yele as well, who could be cover at centre back if they needed to. I'm also thinking Frederic Gilbert, who's had an excellent season at Caen, a season and a half. In fairness to him, he's a very dynamic sort of player at that right back level. Again, the centre backs we've mentioned in the past, Issa Diop, I know you want me to mention him, but Nagnon as well. Those kind of centre backs as well, while maybe not January transfers necessarily, they're the right kind of players for them to go for, and then just finding more options up front. But they'll be a little bit disappointed that they couldn't quite pass the test here. In all honesty, from my point of view, I think that they does put more pressure on them in the January transfer window to try and do something to change it, because they know that a team like Monaco are going to come back probably with a little bit more verve about them in the second half of the season, or you would hope so at least. Lyon seem to be in a nice groove where they're maybe just about learning exactly what their best team is, and we'll come on to them briefly in a moment. But it just feels like it, unfortunately, because it's more frustrating that they were good as well. If Marseille were more pulling out that performance that they did against Lille or against Montpellier, where they were pretty lucky. They didn't do too great, and they just sort of edged a result in the end. If they played that kind of performance against Lyon, we're a little bit less optimistic about them possibly getting in there. Now there's still a little bit there, even though they didn't get the result. It feels like they need to do something in January, and whether they can or not, because it's a very difficult window to get something, especially at a top level, to push you to the next level. It's a different thing. But the victors were Lyon, and they'll be delighted to get 3 points right just before the winter break. Obviously, we have the midweek match day yet to come, but they will finish probably above Marseille at that half break, unless there's a spectacular scoreline for the low in their final game. What interested me in this one, Rich, is we saw it briefly the week before, where Houssem Aouar was very influential against Amiens in the final couple of minutes when he was moved further out wide, and Ndombele came into the side and they linked up quite nicely. They started with that on Sunday night, and that combination with Depay unfortunately dropped to the bench for him at least, seems to be giving them an extra kind of balance, isn't it?
It does. You know, you've got Lucas Toussaint, who's an absolutely fantastic midfielder. You know, he can sort of mop up in front of the defence, and Ndombele then has the sort of engine player that's capable of galloping forward, and then you've got Aouar, who's the sort of, you know, got the skills, I suppose. But you know, I'm really, really excited to see how these three develop. I've tweeted it countless times now. I do see these three being, you know, a big, big part of France's future in 3 or 4 years' time, maybe even sooner for a couple of them. But they're really exciting players. I'm really pleased to see them all being given a chance, being given regular football. I know Genesio has identified that he's only really got true one defensive midfielder in Toussaint. So I know that's an area that he said he wants to look at recruiting in January to make sure that Toussaint, when or if you know, the batteries start to die down a little, that there's someone that can come in and give him a little bit of respite. But the three of those offer so much, such a range and you know, broad spectrum of skills and abilities that I think Lyon can be rightfully excited for the future.
Yeah, and what I really like about that trio as well is it does give Genesio more options. I mean, the versatility of Aouar being able to play centre attacking mid if they wanted to give Fekir a rest, or if they wanted to play with the 3-man midfield, maybe moving him inside with Ndombele and Toussaint, just gives them more options, really. We were stuck in the sort of start of the season thinking that you had to play the front four. If they weren't going to play the front four, then it wasn't going to quite work. But I think what it's proved is playing out wide gives them an extra option, yes, in that front four, but it also gives them an option to adapt things when they do play bigger teams and the like, when they maybe come up against PSG again, maybe when they get into the deeper rounds, if they do with the Europa League. It just gives them an extra bit of flexibility that it felt like they were missing at the start of the season. And it's great to see a young player really step up to the mark. And for Lyon, it gives them, because they have those extra options, it's giving them the edge against the teams like the Marseilles and the other teams fighting around those areas. It'll be interesting to see how, though they and Monaco compete, depending on obviously how Marseille try and improve in January, and these three teams will all sort of compete for this Champions League place. But it'll be very interesting, I think, as seeing what they all decide to do once that window opens January 1st. But let's move on to other matters further down the table. I mean, since next week we'll also include our mid-season awards, it was perfect time really to talk about one of my favourite topics when we do the Get French Football News show, which is the current state of the bottom of the league. All the way up to 11th really are just 5 points above the playoff place and 8 above the drop zone. So we'll go through quite a few teams really, but we'll start at the very bottom with Metz, who we've said, Rich, were dead and buried really. And I always feel like it's almost biting the bullet in a sense that they managed to win at the weekend against the Montpellier side, who frustrated a number of great teams this season, and it was a great little win. And it's probably just come at the right time where you maybe still have doubts of whether they're definitely down. Is this the glimmer of hope that they maybe needed ahead of that winter break?
It's the glimmer of hope, definitely. I mean, we've said all season long, Metz's problem has been goals and the lack of them. So it feels quite ironic that when they finally scored 3 goals, it's against the tightest defence in the league. I certainly didn't see this result coming. I thought Montpellier have looked pretty solid at times, especially against the Metz that I would have thought weren't going to be offering much in attack, but lo and behold, they go and do it. So it's what's now absolutely vital for Metz is that they follow it up then midweek when they're at home to Strasbourg. If they can follow that really encouraging win away at Montpellier with another win at home, go into the winter break then with those 6 points, gets them into double figures, which I think plays a huge part in terms of morale, because when you look at the table, they stick out like an absolute sore thumb at the bottom of the table. So to hit double figures on points, maybe if someone like Angers can't get the win on Wednesday, all of a sudden there's that gap has closed from whatever it is now, is it 6 or 7 points down to only 4 or so. So it's absolutely crucial that they follow this win up. It can't just be a rogue win in isolation. It's important to take those 2 wins if they can get them, and the positive feelings from that into the winter break, so that they can work on it over that break and come back and kick on.
Yeah, it feels like, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Rich, about the game against Strasbourg in midweek. I mean, if they get a victory there, it just feels like maybe something is going there. Like something is finally going in the right direction for them. It doesn't mean necessarily that, I hope at least that it doesn't mean they get naive in January and decide, well, clearly we don't need to do anything. Because this is the sort of strange catch-22 they're in, really. If they had lost that game, say against Montpellier, or possibly even drawn it, and then lost the game at Strasbourg, you look 9 points behind Angers, which is still in the relegation zone, and then they would have been, about 11 or 12 points behind Lille in just the playoff zone. And you start thinking, well, is there really a point in spending in January? There's such a big gap already, such a big gap in quality and in a gulf in points. Is there really worth investing that a lot of money trying to stay in Ligue 1 when we could possibly invest that in sense of building for next season when they are back in Ligue 2, which still looks like the most likely option? But a win against Strasbourg makes them think, maybe there's something to do here. Maybe we invest in January and see if we can roll the dice one more time and see if we can get out of that relegation zone, which is the thing about these relegation fights, isn't it? It's like,
it changes their entire winter break then. It suddenly shines a bit of optimism on it, rather than thinking a bit of doom and gloom of, we're stranded at the bottom. Negative feeling just spreads through the few weeks while we're without football. To go into that, 6 points better off than they were a few weeks ago. All of a sudden that completely changes the outlook. There's optimism, there's hope, there's a bit of determination within the squad that actually, what, guys, we can do it. Let's go out. Let's bring in let's recruit where we need to recruit. We can do this, and I can't stress the importance of that Strasbourg game enough for Metz.
Yeah, it's the hope that kills you, isn't it? That's what you really don't want to hope, is that they finally get a glimmer, something to grasp onto, and you just hope it doesn't really fall back on their face. And really, that my worry would be that they maybe invest too much, they don't get what they need, and then they're stuck in Ligue 2 for another couple of years trying to rectify that, like other Ligue 1 teams have done. So let's hope that if we're winning at Strasbourg, they do the right things and at least make it competitive. That's what we want to see, a competitive bottom of the table, because there's another side that really struggled over the last couple of weeks. I mean, we mentioned them a couple of weeks ago, Angers, and saying that really we should start focusing on them after a bad November. They had a really poor start where they took forever to win a game. They eventually won it in week 9 against Caen. They've only won once since then. It's a pretty dreadful run, really, to be fair. Rich, it's a lot of draws, 9 draws more than anyone in Ligue 1. Only 7 defeats, which doesn't look as bad on paper, but there's just some really frustrating results out there. There's the 1-0, obviously, this weekend against Nantes. They drew 1-1 against Montpellier when they had a decent game. The 1-0 against Monaco. A lot of these games are sort of by the single goal that they're losing, or they're not quite. They're letting too many in. There's a couple of occasions where they've allowed another team back into the game. It frustrated them, especially those games against teams around the bottom. They've lost to Metz. They've lost to Troyes. They've lost to they've drawn against a lot of the other sides around them as well. There's a real worry building around them at the moment that they don't really know what they are at the moment. I know it sounds a bit probably confusing to our audience a little bit, but it just seems like Angers can't quite decide who they want to be anymore.
Yeah, it's always difficult, I think, when there's a side drawing so many matches as Angers seem to be doing. It can be looked in 2 ways, can't it, really? It can be looked at, actually, not a lot needs to change to all of a sudden tweak it, and couple of those draws become wins. A bit of luck, a little bit of extra quality. But simultaneously, of course, it flips the other way around. It's not going to take a lot for those draws to suddenly start to become losses, and losses to become more regular. And, we talked about the mood within the camp with Metz. It's a similar situation with Angers. We know what a disease a negative attitude in the squad can be. I think Angers probably will have enough to get out of this. They've got a couple of decent players who are still capable of getting a result, but they're another side that do need to look at the January transfer window, do need to examine that carefully, think where do we look to where do we need to recruit. They're another side, I think, that can probably look at goals for that to increase. So it may be that a striker is something that they look at. Crivelli has not been the signing that they were hoping to be. They've got Toko Ekambi. He's good for a couple of goals here or there, but he's not a reliable goal scorer. So they need to do something. But I do think there's enough with this Angers side that they will be out of the relegation fight come the end of the season.
They had a similar dip last season as well, where they sort of struggled in the first half and did sort of turn it around. I remember a game, ironically, against Nantes that they lost, and I thought they looked like they might be gunners, but they did turn it around after that result. But you mentioned a man there that they do need to bring goal scorers in, but I really worry that Carl Toko Ekambi seems like one of those players that's ideal for one of these more struggling Premier League sides for goals. Will try and poach in the January transfer window with a sneaky offer that seems too good to be true. and maybe steal him away. And my worry is if he goes and they can't get someone in, the goals have gone. I mean, he scored 7 of their goals this season, which is more than anyone else. He's obviously contributed 2 assists. The nearest to him in terms of goals is 2, and that's Fulgini and Mangani as well. I'm slightly worried. I know we always mention that they've had fantastic games where they've ended up drawing, where they maybe could have nicked it, but I'm really worried that they seem candidates for someone to come in and make a big offer for from their relative standpoint for their player. Him be too tempted away, they allow him to go, they don't get the recruitment in, and with a bit of a gap already, I know it's only took 3-4 points because there is such a glut of teams really at the moment around that bottom end of the table that I feel that they're definitely going to be in a fight this year. They escaped pretty quickly last season in the sort of January, February time, but I feel they might have a bit more of a fight on their hands this season. But a team we should really be worried about in more ways than one, really, at the moment. We talked about it on our preview show on Thursday as well, is Lille. There's a winding up. Well, there's the order from the DNCG. They're not going to be able to do any business in January. There's big bills to pay. Bielsa has gone, so at least that worry, but we don't know anything about compensation or what they've agreed or anything of the like. So money's not going into the club. Players might look to jump ship if there's a possibility in the January transfer window, or you worry about that unless they have some sort of agreement of not allowing players out as well, which is unlikely. This is panic mode, isn't it, for this team? I mean, they got drubbed at Dijon as well early from Dijon, although that side are playing very well at the moment as well. It's concerning, really concerning at the moment for Lille.
Oh, it absolutely is. It is a mess of the highest order. It's remarkable to see how, in the space of half a season, the huge levels of optimism the club had at the start of the season. New owners, money invested, Bielsa at the helm. What could Lille actually achieve this season? And here we are. What are we, 18, 19 games later, and we're talking about, at the minute, Lille are looking like absolute relegation fodder. It's truly remarkable. I really, really don't think anybody saw this coming. But it's just shocking. It really is. They should not be in this position. It was a project that seemed, on the initial face of it, it seemed a sensible project. They wanted to basically copy the Monaco model. That's fine, but I seem to recall at the start of the season I was a little bit concerned that that's fine, but let's remember that the Monaco model started with some huge outlay to get that initial success rolling, to make them an attractive proposition for those talented youngsters around France and around Europe. Lille haven't gone down that route. They've gone for the just try and attract these talented youngsters, but it appears that the youngsters aren't quite perhaps as talented as they thought. Maybe the scouting system is flawed. That's not been looked at as heavily as it should have been if they were going to follow a Monaco-like model. Bielsa was typical Bielsa, and it was his way or no way. And it's just a mess. There have been one or two bright moments. Win away at Lyon, for example, was perhaps a slightly more recent one towards the end of November. But this is a worrying situation for Lille, because no recruitment in January, potentially players out the door in January. I don't see how this rot stops.
Yeah, you start thinking of some of the players that have done okay at times, at least have attracted interest from other places like El Ghazi and Pepe, and you think of maybe someone like Thiago Maia, who's been played out of position at the moment. They must be thinking, right, this is a sinking ship. We need to flee as quickly as possible. And agents will be buzzing around different clubs in the transfer window, trying to get them almost like a fire sale and saying, save my player from this nightmare that they're slowly transforming into, this hurricane that seems to be a Lille team that are spiraling out of control, really. I mean, I mentioned on Thursday's podcast that Marseille fans must be absolutely thankful to the gods. It seemed like Frank McCourt would be the dangerous one given his reputation in the US, but it seems like Gerard Lopez was the one that the boogeyman that they should have feared really, and unfortunately the ones that Lille have been labelled with struggling for money. They shifted too many of these experienced players out in this summer. I know that Mavuba maybe was past his best. Other players as well, maybe just a little bit past their sell-by date in terms of competing at the top end. But they were so invaluable. There's so many young players sort of misguided in this team. I mean, even I know he's been injured as well. Vincent Inyema not being in the team, Marco Bassa as well being let go as well. There's so much experience they lost, and they just tried to throw as many young players at it as possible. And you mentioned that the Monaco model was so successful because they already had good players there that they could learn up from. You know, Ricardo Carvalho, Jean Moutinho, Falcao now, and they brought in Glick last season as well, who's an experienced international. Daniel Subasic, who'd been at the club for a long time. Andrea Raggi. You just list off the kind of players that these young lads learnt from, and Lille didn't get that. And adding that to a manager who demands so much from players and doesn't understand the mind frame of younger players now, that you can't keep insisting that they do that when your results aren't coming. That's knocked them off. They've not got a manager at the helm. They're not going to be able to bring anything in January. It sounds like, and Lille fans will hate hearing this, but it sounds like relegation to me. I can't see any other way for them, really. I think they're going to be automatically relegated. You can't, at the moment, they can't be in the spiral they're in without a manager, without the money, with players worrying about their own futures now, really more than anything. That distraction has really knocked them off course. And I think it was clear to see in that result of the weekend. I mean, Dijon are an excellent side and have been really good in the last sort of 2 months or so, despite a couple of different results. But they absolutely hammered them in the first sort of half. It settled down because Dijon decided, well, we've already won the game. Is there any? Let's save our legs for this game on Wednesday and get possibly another result. But they were absolutely hounded in this one, and even Wesley Saïd and his little renaissance he's had recently with a double as well. They really battered them, and it could have been much worse if Dijon wanted it to be.
The worry for Lille, of course, is, you know, if this does end in relegation, which at the minute is looking really quite likely, you know, what does Lopez do? You know, he's invested a lot of money in this squad, invested a lot of money to buy the club, and all of a sudden he's got a second division side on his hands. You know, if he walks away, if he sells the club on the cheap to whoever, you know, what on earth's left with the club, especially if French football financial regulators are sort of watching them like a hawk, which they clearly are at the minute, thanks to the transfer ban and the sort of "we will relegate you if things don't improve" official warning card that was handed to them. So there's major problems here that could have, you know, not only short-term but long-term repercussions for the club as well.
Yeah, because the memories of teams like Bastia and Evian are starting to ring in your ears almost, that those sort of being relegated with those financial troubles and then simply just folding. There was no real point. We'll make a further point on the DNCG at some other point where they maybe should help out these clubs a little bit more and safeguard them a little bit better. But you do start to worry about some of those teams that have had financial trouble going down and then simply dissolving, unfortunately. And that's sometimes the reality in French football sometimes. But let's talk about some of the teams that are just at least hovering outside those positions at the moment. And there's quite a fair few, really, to be fair. There's a few on sort of it's spread out a little bit more than it did a couple of weeks ago. But the team just above the drop zone at the moment is Toulouse, surprisingly. And there's a few surprising teams. We talked about Saint-Etienne and Bordeaux last week. They're 2 places above that drop zone, above Toulouse as well. It's been a tough few weeks for all 3 of those teams. I mean, Saint-Etienne extend that really awful run to a 1 win in 11 now, with that win coming against Metz. Bordeaux, 1 win in 10. Theirs was against Saint-Etienne. Toulouse themselves, they got a couple of recent wins that sort of pulled them out of that malaise that they had against a Caen side the other week, a 2-0 win after 4 defeats in 5, and including a draw against Metz, which is not the kind of result really you want to be getting if you're down near the bottom of the table. But they lost against an informed Strasbourg team, and they've got Lyon in midweek, which is exactly the kind of team you want to play when you're struggling at the moment. Is this one of these moments where, for Toulouse at least to start off with, where they maybe need to reset things come the winter break, get back down? Because they have a lot of talent in that squad. It's just not clicking. The attack again is struggling, and that's heaping more pressure on this young, yet they are a great defensive team, but they're really struggling.
Well, that's the weird thing with Toulouse I've found is I look at the teams around them at the bottom, and they're the team I think, well, actually, I don't think they've been playing too badly. They just don't seem to be getting the luck. And yeah, they're lacking a bit of quality, but that's going to be the case when you are a team down there. But there's certainly far more teams down the bottom of the table, I think, that are playing worse football than Toulouse. There's some really, really talented youngsters in that team. I think keeping hold of them, certainly the likes of Diop, keeping hold of him is absolutely vital. In January, ultimately this squad, this coach, they have experience of how to get themselves out of they've got the experience of getting themselves out of a near impossible situation. Well, this is far from that. So on the one hand, yes, they have that experience to get them out of the trouble. On the other hand, the teams directly above them are teams that you do not expect to be there, and frankly, I don't expect them to be there come the end of the season in Saint-Etienne and Bordeaux. So that's perhaps the major worry for Toulouse, is that of the sort of 7 or 8 teams that are down at the bottom, there's certainly 2, maybe even a couple more, that as the new year comes and the season draws on, I don't expect them to be down there. So Toulouse can't afford to let those teams get too far ahead, but they're a side that I think just about have enough in them to get out of this mess. Because, as I say, I just don't think they've been playing too badly. I think they've just been unfortunate. So, maybe 1 or 2 little tweaks in January could be enough.
Yeah, it's a weird one for Toulouse. They've got a lot of talent. It just feels like they're just missing an extra spark. I mean, Jimmy Dermaz has been out for a couple of weeks. Losing Oscar Trejo in the summer as well, but it gave them less of a sort of creative edge, although Alexis Blin has tried his best to try and influence that. But they've just not got it going at that end, and it's increased pressure moving forward, hasn't it?
Yeah, they need to work out what's happening with Andy Delors. If they can get him back to the Khan Andy Delors, and maybe the Andy Delors that first arrived with Toulouse when he came back to France, then that will almost certainly solve the vast majority of their problems. But at the minute, he's just looking, really, really off the pace.
And they need someone more around him. I mean, they've tried to play Ola Toivonen off him a little bit, but that just, I don't know, it just doesn't work for me, really. I don't think Toivonen is creative enough or skilled enough to sort of bring Andy Delors more into play without much wing play and without much help from the midfield. It's just not quite clicking. They maybe need a creative force in the summer window. You think that it's a bit of a shame that Maximilien Gradel has not quite reached the level we expect from him. Again, if Dermas comes back, that might help them a lot, given his form for Sweden as well. Maybe there's a couple of bits there, but I'll let you talk about the other 2 teams above them, really, because I talked about them ad nauseum last week, really, Rich, and that's Bordeaux and Saint-Etienne. They've both been really, really awful over the last couple of weeks, and it's only really getting worse. They are both kind of desperate for that winter break to come and hope that a little bit of a break gives them some respite.
That's the thing, isn't it? They get into that winter break, regroup, work out what on earth has gone wrong. Saint-Etienne, I think it's perhaps, well, I'd say there's probably obvious deficiencies with both squads. Saint-Etienne have gone, initially we thought they'd taken a step forward when, they started the season playing some, far more attractive and attacking football under Oscar Garcia than we'd seen for quite a few years under Galtier. That football quickly regressed. Garcia then left. And the football's just got worse. They're back to They're not scoring, which, we're sort of quite used to that under Galtier, but at least with Galtier, they were defensively solid. That defensive solidity has vanished. We expect Saint-Etienne sides to, not fail to score, but we don't expect them to be regularly conceding 3 goals, 4 goals, 5 goals, and that's exactly what's happening. There's just a real lack of. I mean, you mentioned it with Toulouse. There's a real lack of spark with this side. There's no one that you can say will be a reliable goal scorer. There's no one that you can say will take the game by the scruff of the neck and completely dominate proceedings. Defense looks a shambles at times. Perrin, unfortunately, it's becoming clear he's towards the end of his career. He's picking up injuries more regularly. The squad is a mess. It's a real mess. And they've got to address that in January. They've got to bring in quality. They've got to bring in some quality attacking players. Because if they don't, then contrary to perhaps what I said before, maybe they don't get out of this mess. The only reason I'm saying that I think they'll get out of this mess is probably, man for man, they do have slightly a better squad than other teams down there, but it's not by a great deal at the minute. So they have to look at that January transfer window to bring in something exciting, something different than the sort of. It's an adjective I've used countless times before. It's stodgy football that they play. It's not nice to watch. It's even worse to watch now than it was under Galtier. At least Galtier could get a result with his side. He knew what his side's strengths were. He played to them, and it worked. It seems at the minute Saint-Etienne do not know what they're. Even if they perhaps even they might not even have a strength. It's an utter mess. So they need to look at some kind of spark, some kind of bolt of lightning kind of player. And Bordeaux, I think Bordeaux just need to look at. They need a goal scorer first and foremost. They've, the de Preville experiment doesn't seem to be working, which is a shame. And I know you're obviously a huge fan as well, Nathan. So it's a real shame not to see that working. Alexandre Mendy now is out for the season. So Gourvenec, if he's still there, because he's under massive pressure now, if he's still there come the January transfer window, will have his hand forced into bringing in an attacker. And he just needs to work on getting some stability in that side. He's made quite a few changes of late. Including playing Sabali out on the left, which is clearly not his favourite position. For me, he's made the ultimate sacrifice in dropping Costille. It seems to be going off the rails with Bordeaux after what was actually quite a promising start to the season. Certainly a promising transfer window in the summer and a promising start to the season. The wheels have well and truly come off. Now, it's whether Bordeaux will give Gourvenec time to turn this around. We saw what Gourvenec did with time with Guingamp. He was given the time that he needed to get the squad how he wanted, playing how he wanted, and look at all the success he brought for that club. So it's whether Bordeaux can cope with that, whether the Bordeaux ball can have that same patience and give Gourvenec time. I fear they won't. As much as I'm a big fan of Gourvenec, I fear they won't, because there's obviously quite a few more Bordeaux fans showing dissent than there probably ever were at Guingamp. It's obviously a job that's in a bit more of a spotlight. He'll have spent more with Bordeaux than, again, he probably ever will have done at Guingamp. There's stakes are higher. At the minute, Gourvenec is not doing a good enough job. I don't mind admitting that. But as I say, my fear is they're not going to give him time. And as we've seen so many times with sort of mid-season managerial changes when the teams are struggling towards the bottom, it's sort of the last act of a desperate club. So I'm hoping they give him time. because I do, both can rescue this season. They're not going to get European football, but they can rescue this season. But it's how they navigate that January transfer window that will dictate how well they can get out of this mess.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of points on both very quickly that I'll go through, different from what I mentioned last week. For Saint-Etienne, it's a very simple one, and I'll keep it short. It shows you how good of a defender Loic Perrin is, that they've absolutely crumbled in his absence. I think those outside of France will never really quite know how good of a player he was, because he didn't really play internationally, and there was very little European football, at least in his so far in his career. But he's really proving how good of a centre-back he is, that Saint-Etienne have absolutely fallen under the bridge with him not at the helm at all. And they weren't great with him at the helm, but it does really show how sometimes you get what you wish for when Galtier left as well. And in Bordeaux's case, there's a couple of things really. In terms of what I would like to see from them in the second half of the season, and quick spoiler for unsurprisingly, I've wrote in the deep reveal profile for the GFFN 100 that comes out in the new year, but a little bit of a spoiler in that one, that I'd quite like to see him play as a number 10 behind a new striker, Malcolm and Kamano either side of him. Give them a little bit more freedom. They just seem so stagnant in the area sometimes, and they all seem to run into the same space that they want to occupy, and that's really held them back really this season, especially with Mendy not really being good enough either to be a central striker on his own, and obviously Laborde being out, but being disappointing when he had the chances as well. But I do fear for Gourvenec. I think that moment where he's dropped Castile for Prior might be his undoing. If they lose in midweek, I think he's gone in January, in all honesty. That's one of those moves that seems like desperation when he knows the issue is the defence and he throws his goalkeeper to the wolves. Seems like madness to me, especially such a talented goalkeeper as well.
Interestingly, on Dip Reveal, there's I think it's France Football have gone with a story this evening to suggest that Bordeaux may cut their losses with him in January. And there's 3 clubs that they have linked him with a move to. One's Rennes, one's Burnley, and the other, interestingly, is Saint-Etienne.
I think they'd have hands off, wouldn't they?
Oh, yeah, they would. I think they're looking at certainly getting their money back, which I think was around 12 million. They signed him from Lille, something like that. So, I mean, it'll be an interesting one if they do. It's quite a confession from an admittance that we made a mistake in signing Depreville, because we know he can score. We've seen it with Lille more recently. We know he can score. So maybe Saint-Etienne are thinking, well, if you're going to get rid of, then he could be the kind of player that they need, as we've discussed.
Yeah, because he was a great creator at Reims as well in that season that they went down. I think he got 9 assists. I think he fits really nice. I think you would agree, Rich, that maybe in that Rennes team as well, maybe with Sarr next to him, having someone explosive that will run past him in that area as well, giving him support as well. I think it might be a really interesting signing for both those sides if Bordeaux look to cut their losses, which it won't be the first time someone's tried to give up on Dave Preville in his career. We'll sort of very quickly go through a couple more teams that are at least hovering in that area, really. It's a little bit more unlikely for 2 of them, but Troyes and Amiens are still there on 21 points. They've both had decent runs at times. Seem to keep getting little results here and there that keep propping them up further up the table, just above the relegation places. And Amiens had that great little run where I think they were unbeaten in 7, but they've hit the ground a little bit in the last couple of weeks, losing a couple of games. But do those 2 have the staying power, really, Rich, to avoid a relegation fight for the entire season?
I think there's potential. I'm always a little bit worried when promoted sides have a decent run but don't pull away sufficiently from the bottom of the table, because at some point that form will drop off. Unfortunately, history has shown that to be the case. And my only concern is that Troyes and Amiens, perhaps the latter more than the former, away from that relegation zone as far as they perhaps would have wanted to, and perhaps far more. They haven't pulled away anywhere near as much as their form shows that they perhaps should have done. They performed really, really well for a team that many, including myself, feared were going to be, in Mets' situation and maybe even worse off. So that's my only concern, is that at some point that form will drop. And it's that they've unfortunately just not built up enough of a buffer to prevent that drop in form resulting in a fight to avoid relegation. I think the same to be said for a lesser extent for Troyes. Maybe with their recent Ligue 1 experience, they've got a bit more now. It's a bit more, they're a bit more of a savvy side that they can get out of that, and maybe in the January transfer window, if they're fighting with someone like Amiens for a player, maybe Troyes is a slightly more attractive option over the two. So, but certainly both of them, I could make the argument that they've shown plenty of ability that they can avoid the drop, but it's just unfortunate that it's such a tight group of teams that they just don't have that buffer for when that inevitable drop in form comes.
Yeah, my worry I think Troyes might just have one of those. I'm going to compare them both to teams in recent seasons, and Troyes remind me of Caen last season, that they got a couple of nifty wins around a couple of losses that have just perched them up enough. And I think they might continue doing that next season, maybe lose 3 games and then nick a win, and that sort of props them up enough just to stay up. They might sort of finish just outside the playoff place, maybe. With Amiens, I compare it a little bit to Gazalec, who also had a period when they were in Ligue 1 for that season, that they had a period of maybe a month or two where they got some really good results and some draws and some wins, and then they just tailed off in the second half of the season. I really fear that Amiens might be that kind of team where maybe they punch above their weight for a good time. They might just only go down in the sort of last couple of weeks and sort of sink, but I think they will be there or thereabouts in the end result of sort of fighting for those relegation places. But very quickly on 2 last teams, and that's Guingamp and Montpellier. It seems strange to mention both of those, really, given that Montpellier have been fantastic against some big teams this season, but are still probably hovering in the sense that a couple of bad results at the start of the second half of the season might drag them in there. Same with Guingamp. They looked pretty poor in the last sort of couple of months, but two recent wins have really propped them back up the table quite quickly, which is how things shape at the moment. I mean, looking at Nice as well, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, we're sort of 18th, 19th, and now they're in 6th. It's how Ligue 1 is at the moment, really, in that bottom half of the table. But is there any real worries that either of those two could dip into there, or do you think that with Guingamp getting those couple of wins have sort of moved themselves back into what we expect from them, and the same with Montpellier, that those results against those bigger teams will help encourage them to stay up relatively comfortably in the end?
I think Guingamp will have enough that they're just going to have another mid-table finish, and that will be perfectly satisfactory for a team like Guingamp, and that's absolutely no disrespect intended. I think a mid-table finish for what that club represents is still punching well above where they should be, and is still should be seen as a terrific achievement. So I don't think they're going to have particularly many issues. I don't think Montpellier will have any issues. I think they are capable of grabbing enough. Well, certainly they've got the defensive stability to ensure that they're not going to have too many issues, and they are able to perhaps nick 1 or 2 more goals than those nearer the bottom. So again, I don't think they're going to have too much of an issue, although we have seen in last couple of seasons that they are capable of sinking like a stone. But ultimately, when push comes to shove, I think they are a team that are capable of grinding out a result when it's needed. So I don't see those two having too many issues.
Yeah, I think both of them will probably be okay unless something really dramatic happens to them in the last couple of weeks of the season. That's filled up quite a bit of our time this evening, which the relegation fight in this season, at least with so many teams down there, is not too surprising. So we'll go straight to our Ligue 1 snapshots this week, and I know you have a couple of good ones for us, Rich, this week. So I'll start with you. What are your Ligue 1 snapshots?
One of them, very quickly, was in the Rennes PSG game. After Mbappe got his goal, there was a group of 4 fans that got onto the pitch dressed as the Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles and ran towards Mbappe, wanting a hug, which was quite, all in all, quite harmless. I know there's obviously always concerns over pitch invaders, but I think it was quite evident that this was a harmless little joke play on Mbappe's link to resembling, I think it's Donatello of the Turtles.
Yeah.
And the mask, the present that Thiago Silva got him recently as well. There was a funny tweet from a Rennes fan. There's a picture of them after being apprehended with a plea to Mbappe and PSG to pay the fine for the Turtles. So that's picked up a little bit of traction in the French press. The other one, I think, for me, perhaps a slightly more personal one, but this week saw the retirement of certainly one of my all-time favourite players, and a player who was absolutely instrumental in the reasons why I follow French football and was instrumental in Lyon's run to successive titles a few years ago, was the retirement of Kim Källström. Decided to hang up his boots after a season back in his native Sweden. Absolutely wonderful player. I probably can't. I haven't got enough time to go into the many reasons why I loved him as a player, but worked hard, had an absolutely terrific left foot shot. There's quite a brilliant goal he scored for Rennes, ironically against Lyon, where he connects with a left foot volley it's about 4 foot up in the air. I don't quite know how he does it, but I certainly recommend searching that one out. But he was an absolutely wonderful player. A lot of people will know him from funny enough, from the Championship Manager, I think 2001, 2002 game, where he became a bit of a cult hero. But for me, he was far more than that. He was a wonderful player for Rennes. Probably, and it pains me to say it, upped his game even more for Lyon, and got well over 100. Lost even count of how many caps for Sweden he got. So an absolutely wonderful player, and a shame to see him retire, because I still held out for a hopeful Rennes return. But I'm sure we'll see him back with a ceremonial kickoff or two for Rennes and Lyon in the not too distant future. But certainly wish him a very, very happy retirement.
Yeah, and he was an absolute stalwart for Lyon. It's a shame that a lot of English fans will only remember him as that strange loan spell where he was injured when they signed him, and he ended up barely playing for them. But it just shows you how excellent a footballer he was. Got plenty of over 131 caps for Sweden, should say. Enough, really. He crashed the Djurgården's website when he joined back in the summer as well, which just shows you the love that he had back in.
He was also named in his final season in Sweden, and their season's just recently finished. He was named in the team of the season, I believe, as well.
Yeah, which is fantastic. It just shows you the appreciation they had. He was a really, really terrific player in his prime, and so it'll be. Well, hopefully, that could be, like you say, hopefully a couple of ceremonial kickoffs, we'll see him again. But my Ligue 1 snapshots, I've got 2 this week, and one nice one and a funny one as well. The funny one will be the one at Nantes. I don't know if some people have seen this, but Claudio Ranieri was sent to the stands towards the end of that game. But the Italian had a little bit of a sneaky way of getting a little bit further down his instructions on. He actually came down during one of the substitutions and talked to the substitute and his coach and went back up to the stands. Well, I know it's been caught on camera at least, so whether he might be punished retrospectively for that remains to be seen. But it was a little bit of a cheeky one from the Italian. Maybe might have just about have enough charm to get away with that one, at least anyway, for once. And the other one it's another moving on, and that's the Lyon goalkeeping coach, Joe Batts, who was ending his 17-year association with the club to join Montreal Impact early come at the start of the new year, but joining obviously the former Lyon manager Renegard. He will be joining them, and there was a great display from the fans and the players, the appreciation. They all came up to hug him when they scored goals and paraded him around the pitch afterwards. And it's clearly been a great servant to the club and helped coach some magnificent goalkeepers in his time. You think of some of the players he's had, not just Lopez, but Verkuta and Lloris and the players before that as well. Yeah. I've been an absolute servant for the club, and I know a lot of Lyon fans will be really sad to see him go. But let's hope for him that he has a great future in Canada and a nice little vacation there. It would be quite a nice place to be, actually, I think, for him. It might be a little bit chillier, at least, anyway. But at least they speak French. That's the positive, at least. That's all the time we have for this week. My thanks to Rich and everyone listening at home. On Thursday's show, it will be the special final GFFN show of our 2017, with it will also include our half-term award. So do tune in for that. But for now, a bientôt and goodbye.